Most nights are routine patrols, cameras, paperwork. But the night I saw something on the monitors that wasn't really there, my job turned into a nightmare. I've been a hospital security guard for 7 years. My shift starts at 10 p.m., ends at 6 a.m., and most nights follow the same pattern. I make my rounds, check the locked wards, respond to the occasional drunk visitor or panicked family member. Hospitals are strange, at night machines humming, lights dimmed, staff moving like ghosts. You get used to the silence, the way it feels alive. That night, I settled into the control room just before midnight, a styrofoam cup of coffee sweating in my hand. The monitors lined the wall in front of me, 32 cameras covering every corner. ICU, pediatrics, the morgue hallway, even the old surgical wing that hadn't been used in years. I always start with a sweep, click through each camera, make sure nothing looks off. That night, everything looked normal. 2 nurses at the desk on 4th floor, a janitor mopping near the elevators, empty corridors stretching into stillness. I leaned back, exhaled, let the caffeine start its slow work. That's when the first alarm buzzed. Door sensor, East Wing Ward C. My brows knit. Ward C had been closed for almost a decade. It was stripped bare, sealed off after funding cuts. The door was supposed to stay locked permanently. I clicked to the corresponding camera. The hallway was empty. White tiles, peeling paint, a flickering light in the distance. No one there. Still, protocol is protocol. I radioed in dispatch. This is Cole, on night security. Door sensor triggered. Ward C, East Wing. I'm checking it out. The radio crackled back. Board. Copy. Ward C, probably a glitch again. I strapped on my flashlight, clipped my keys, and headed out. The East Wing always felt wrong. Too quiet, like the air itself was stale. My boots echoed on the linoleum as I made my way to Ward C. Sure enough, the door was still locked, padlock secure. No sign of tampering. I scanned the corridor with my flashlight. Nothing but dust and silence. Satisfied, I headed back to the control room. When I sat down, I froze. On the monitor, Ward C wasn't empty anymore. Someone was standing in the middle of the hallway, just under the flickering light. A figure, still as stone. But I had just been there. And I hadn't seen anyone. I leaned so close to the screen my breath fogged the glass. The grainy black and white feed showed the East Wing corridor exactly as I'd left it, peeling paint, overhead light stuttering every few seconds. And under that light stood a figure, tall, thin, still. I couldn't make out a face. The camera's resolution wasn't good enough, but the silhouette was human shoulders, arms hanging at its sides. My stomach tightened. I whispered out loud, though no one was there to hear. How? I'd walked that same stretch less than 3 minutes earlier. My flashlight had swept every corner. The hallway had been empty. I was sure of it. The radio at my hip crackled suddenly, making me jump. Ward C still good? Dispatch asked. I swallowed hard, eyes still glued to the monitor. Yeah, I lied. False alarm, just a glitch. But even as I said it, the figure shifted. Just slightly, a tilt of the head, like it was listening. A chill rippled up my arms. I grabbed the joystick and zoomed the camera. The image sharpened a little. The figure was facing the door, facing me. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe it was a trick of the feed-used static, an old recording loop. Cameras in this wing were ancient. But then, as I watched, the figure stepped forward. One smooth stride, then another. No sound came from the corridor mic. No footfalls. I reached for the phone to call maintenance, but stopped. Something inside me whispered, check for yourself, see if it's really there. It was insane, but my job was to check, so I stood, flashlight in hand again, and headed down the hallway. The closer I got to the East Wing, the heavier the air felt, like walking into a sealed box. My boots echoed the same rhythm as before. I rounded the corner toward Ward C and froze. The corridor was empty. Same flickering light, same peeling walls, but no figure, no one. I swept the beam of my flashlight across every inch. Nothing. My radio crackled again, just static this time. But layered under the hiss, I swear I heard something else. 3 faint knocks, not on the door, from inside the wing. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I held it on the heavy metal door of Ward C. The padlock was still intact, the same thick rusted one I'd rattled not 10 minutes earlier. Nobody had passed me in the corridor. Nobody could have slipped in unseen, and yet I'd heard it. 3 distinct knocks. I pressed my ear against the cold metal, holding my breath. For a moment, only silence. Then faint but deliberate tap, tap, tap. I jerked back so fast the light swung wild across the walls. My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed to call back up, but another voice whispered, "What would you even say?" That a closed ward knocked back. I forced myself to breathe. "Protocol," I muttered. "Check, document, report." I crouched, inspecting the lock again. No scratches, no dents. The dust along the frame was undisturbed, and yet the air felt charged, as though something was waiting just beyond the door. I retreated slowly, boots heavy on the linoleum, eyes fixed on the door until the corridor bent me out of sight. My hands were damp on the flashlight handle. Back in the control room, I stared at the monitors. Ward C's feed flickered once, twice, and cleared. Empty hallway. No figure now. But the timestamp proved it. When I'd been standing there in person, the cameras had still shown something standing beneath that light. I leaned forward, scanning the footage again and again. No glitches, no recording loop, just something I hadn't seen with my own eyes. The radio startled me once more. "Jaya, the night nurse. Security, can you check the ICU stairwell? Someone keeps pressing the door alarm. No one's there when we look." I rubbed my temples. "Copy, on my way." I switched cameras to the ICU stairwell before heading out. Empty, just the concrete steps, the painted rails. But as I leaned closer to the screen, my heart lurched. There was a shadow on the 3rd step, long stretched, shaped like a person. But no one was there to cast it. I stared at the monitor, hardly breathing. The ICU stairwell was emptier. It should have been. But the shadow remained, cast sharp against the concrete steps, human-shaped, elongated by the overhead light. Yet there was no one there to create it. I toggled the camera, checked other angles. Every feed showed the same thing, an empty stairwell. No intruder, no staff, just that impossible shadow. My radio buzzed again, Jaya's voice cracking with unease. "Security. The alarm's going off again. Can you hurry?" I forced my voice steady. "Copy. Heading there now." But my throat was dry, because if the cameras weren't lying, then whatever triggered the alarm was something I couldn't see with my own eyes. The ICU corridor was silent when I arrived, the air heavy with disinfectant and the faint hum of machines. Nurses glanced up as I passed, relief flickering across their tired faces. I gave a curt nod, masking the knot in my gut. The stairwell door was still closed. The red light on the alarm panel blinked steadily. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Concrete steps descended into dimness. The overhead light buzzed faintly. I swept my flashlight down the stairwell, beam cutting through shadows. Nothing, just dust and silence. But when I looked down at the 3rd step, my breath caught. It was darker. Not just the ordinary gloom of a stairwell, but thicker, like the light bent around it. My flashlight beam touched it, but the shape absorbed it, dulling the brightness. And I realized with a shiver, the shadow was still there. Only now I was standing right above it. I leaned against the rail, straining to hear. Nothing at first. Then a faint scrape, like a shoe dragging against concrete. My stomach dropped. I swung the flashlight wildly. The stairs were empty. My radio crackled against my chest, startling me. "Security? Jaya again." Her voice tighter this time. "Are you in the stairwell? Because the monitors are showing you're not alone." My blood turned cold. I snatched the radio. "Repeat." Static hissed, then her voice came back, shaking. "There's someone standing 3 steps below you. Tall, still right beside you. But we can't see them on the floor." The beam of my flashlight jittered as my hands trembled. The 3rd step was empty, my eyes swore it was. Yet the cameras, the nurses, saw otherwise. "Jaya," I whispered hoarsely, "what are they doing?" Silence stretched. Then she said, "They're looking up at you." My knees nearly buckled. I backed out of the stairwell, slamming the door shut, my breath ragged in my throat. The alarm panel shrieked once and went dark. I leaned against the cool wall, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might punch through my chest. The hospital had always been strange at night, yes, But this was different, because the cameras weren't showing just corridors and stairwells anymore. They were showing me what my eyes couldn't, and whatever it was, it had started following me. I didn't patrol the rest of that hour. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too much, and I knew if I left the glow of the monitors, I'd start hearing those phantom footsteps again. So I locked myself in the security control room and pulled up the saved feeds. Our system auto-recorded every camera, looping data to a hard drive that rarely kept more than a week. Normally, it was boring footage, empty corridors, janitors mopping floors, the occasional lost visitor wandering into the wrong wing. But that night, when I rewound the ICU stairwell feed, my stomach turned to stone. At 1:46 a.m., the moment I opened the stairwell door, the figure was already there. Not a trick of the light, not a glitch. A tall, thin silhouette on the third step, head tilted upward. I scrubbed forward, me entering, sweeping the flashlight, walking right past it. On the screen, it looked inches from me, face tilted toward mine, and yet my body language showed nothing. I hadn't seen a thing. I slammed pause, pulse hammering in my ears. I replayed it again and again. Every time, the same image. Me brushing close to something invisible, something that the cameras saw but my eyes denied. I switched to the East Wing feed from earlier. My patrol, the empty corridor, me rattling the locked door. The padlock glinted in my flashlight beam. But behind me, just at the edge of the frame, the figure stood beneath the flickering light, watching, silent. I whispered, "How?" My voice trembled. The sound made me jump, because it hadn't come from my throat. It came from the speakers, one of the corridor mics, feeding faintly into the control room. I stared at the console. All channels showed green. No staff had keyed their radios. No one else was on the line. I rewound the audio. There it was again. A whisper layered under the hum of the cameras. A single word, low, stretched. Sparrow. The hair on my neck stood on end. That name hadn't been mine in 20 years. My father used to call me that when I was a girl, back when I was small and quick, always darting through the yard like a bird. He died when I was 12. No one else had ever called me that. Not since. I scrubbed the audio again, pressing the headset tighter, praying I'd misheard. But no, the whisper was there, unmistakable. Sparrow. The console lights flickered. One of the cameras jumped to live feed. Ward C. The hallway was empty, except the padlock now hung open, swaying gently as though it had just been unlatched. I knew I hadn't touched it. I knew I'd checked, and still, the lock was undone. My radio exploded with static so loud I flinched. Buried under it, a faint rhythm pulsed 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. When the static died, the control room was so silent I could hear my own pulse thundering. On the monitor, the Ward C door creaked an inch open, and the cameras, all 32 of them, froze on the same frame. The empty corridor, the cracked door, and a sliver of blackness waiting inside. The door to Ward C hadn't been opened in years. I knew that for a fact. Maintenance had welded it shut before my first shift at this hospital. And yet, on the monitors, the padlock hung loose. The door cracked just wide enough to breathe darkness into the hall. I told myself not to go. Call dispatch. Call engineering. Call anyone. But the radios were quiet now. No signal but static. And deep down, I knew no one would believe me anyway. They'd see the door intact in the morning, shake their heads, and wonder if the long shifts were finally getting to me. So I clipped the flashlight to my belt, shoved my keys into my pocket, and walked toward the East Wing. The closer I got, the stranger the air felt. The hospital humped the vents, the fluorescent buzz, the distant shuffle of carts faded into silence. My boots echoed too loudly, and then I smelled it. Not antiseptic, not dust. Something sharp and chemical, laced with the faintest trace of oranges. When I reached the corridor, I stopped dead. The door really was ajar. The padlock lay on the floor, cold and rusted, as though it had been cut free years ago. I pushed the door slowly, its hinges shrieking into the silence. My flashlight beam cut across the ward, cracked tiles, broken gurneys, walls stripped bare. The air was stale, heavy, like stepping into a room that had been waiting, patient. I forced myself forward, light sweeping the corners. Nothing moved. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was walking in step with me close, just out of sight. Halfway down the corridor, I froze. The sound of my boots had doubled. For every step I took, there was another, just a half beat behind, softer but there. I spun, light slicing across the hall, empty. Heart hammering, I raised the radio. Control, this is Cole. I'm in Ward C. Door was open. I need backup. The speaker hissed. Then, layered under the static, a voice whispered, Sparrow? My stomach dropped. The radio slipped in my sweaty hand, and then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. At the far end of the ward, in the circle of my flashlight, the floor was littered with papers, hundreds of them, scattered like feathers. I stepped closer. The beam steadied on one page. My throat closed. It was a grainy, printed still frame from the security feed, the ICU stairwell, and there I was frozen, mid-step, flashlight raised, standing next to the shadow I had never seen. Dozens of photos covered the floor, each one showing me from the cameras, always with that thing beside me, watching. The air grew heavy. My light flickered, and from the blackness at the far end of the hall came the sound again. 3 knocks, slow, patient, waiting. I crouched slowly, the flashlight beam trembling as it swept across the litter of papers. They weren't random. Each page was crisp, black and white timestamps in the corner, pulled straight from our own security system. ICU stairwell, East Wing, even the control room. Every frame showed me, sometimes walking, sometimes standing, sometimes frozen mid-step, with my mouth open as if speaking, and always the same dark silhouette at my side. My hands shook as I lifted one photo closer. This one was different. My blood went cold. It wasn't from the hospital. It was from my house. The image was grainy, but I knew the room instantly. My kitchen. The crooked blinds over the sink, the chipped mug on the counter, and there I was, blurry but unmistakable, walking past the stove in my uniform. The time stopped, 2 nights ago, 3:11 a.m. The shadow was there too, right behind me, longer, darker than it should have been. I dropped the page as if it burned. This isn't possible, I whispered. The pile rustled. I swear the papers shifted, as though a breath had moved them. One sheet slid across the tiles, stopping at my boot. With dread, I bent to look. This time, the photo wasn't old. It was live. The timestamp matched the exact second flashing on my watch. The image showed me, crouched on the floor of Ward C, flashlight in hand, just as I was now. And behind me, the shadow leaned close, head tilted as if whispering into my ear. I spun, heart lurching. The corridor behind me was empty. Just dust, broken equipment, flickering light. But the air felt thick, heavy, occupied. I staggered backward, kicking papers aside, desperate to leave. My flashlight beam cut over the cracked tiles, the broken gurneys. The exit door seemed farther away than it should have been. My radio hissed suddenly, bursting to life. Jaya's voice crackled through, panicked. Cole? Are you in Ward C? The camera's God? You need to get out of there. Why? What do you see? I rasped, clutching the handset. Her answer was almost a sob. It's standing right behind you. My breath caught, every muscle locking. And then I heard it close now, so close it vibrated through my bones. 3 knocks. Not from the walls, from inside the room. I bolted for the exit, boots crunching over scattered photos, breath ragged in my throat. The Ward C door loomed ahead, still cracked, its rusted hinges shrieking as I shoved it open. The corridor beyond felt like oxygen after drowning, but the relief was brief, because my radio came alive again, this time, not with Jaya's voice, but with something lower, softer, a child's voice. Why did you leave me there, Anna? My blood froze. Anna, my name. I spun, flashlight beam cutting back into the ward. The papers lay still. The gurneys hadn't moved, but the air felt wrong. The radio hissed again. You promised you wouldn't go. You promised you'd stay in the attic with me until the storm was over. My knees weakened. No one here should know about that. No one could. When I was 9, my little brother and I hid in our grandparents' attic during a thunderstorm. The power cut out, the house shook with wind, and we whispered to each other through the dark. He was scared, so I promised I'd stay awake with him until it passed. But I didn't. I fell asleep. And when I woke, he was gone. The police said he'd wandered down, panicked, gotten lost in the night. They never found him. My family never forgave me. No one at this hospital knew that story. No one. My flashlight flickered. At the far end of the ward, under the broken ceiling light, a figure stood, now small, child-sized, head tilted. I backed into the corridor, my heart battering my ribs. "You're not real," I whispered, my voice cracking. "You're not him." But the voice on the radio was steady, soft, almost sad. "You promised, Sparrow." My breath caught. The nickname, my brother's name for me. His little bird. The figure stepped closer, though its face stayed hidden in shadow. I dropped the radio, the clatter echoing like a gunshot, and ran. My flashlight beam swung wild across the walls as I fled down the east wing, but I could still hear it, 3 slow knocks, following me, each one closer than the last. When I reached the control room, I slammed the door and locked it. My chest heaved, sweat dripping into my eyes. I forced myself to look at the monitors, desperate to prove it was all in my head. But there he was, camera 12, Pediatrics Hall, a small figure standing in the glow of a nightlight, still as stone. And on the screen below it, camera 7, the ICU stairwell, showed the same shadow I had seen before. Only this time, it wasn't alone. The smaller figure stood right beside it, both of them looking straight into the camera, straight at me. I slammed the monitor switchboard, flipping through feeds one after another, praying the figures would vanish. But they didn't. Camera 12, Pediatrics Hall. The small figure still stood beneath the nightlight, its head bowed slightly, as if listening. Camera 7, ICU stairwell. The taller shadow lingered on the 3rd step, that impossible place where no one ever stood. Camera 3, our entrance. Empty at first, until the static flickered and suddenly, both of them were there, side by side, just outside the sliding doors. My breath hitched. I jerked the controls, switching cameras faster. Faster radiology corridor, surgery wing, the cafeteria, each time, a heartbeat of emptiness. And then there they were. They weren't walking, they weren't running, they were simply appearing, moving closer, camera by camera, with each flicker of static. I pressed back against my chair, stomach twisting. "No," I whispered. "No, you're not real." The radio on the desk crackled, and the child's voice threaded through the static again. "You promised you wouldn't leave me, Sparrow. You said you'd never look away." I slapped the radio off, but the voice bled through the monitors now, layered, distorted, overlapping itself in whispers. "Sparrow, Sparrow, Sparrow." The control room lights flickered, then steadied, leaving a film of darkness clinging to the corners. On camera 14, the East Wing feed blinked back to life. The ward I had just fled was empty, except for one thing. The papers. They weren't scattered anymore. They were neatly arranged in a circle on the floor, edges touching. At the center sat the blue tin lunchbox from my childhood attic. I couldn't breathe. That box had burned in a house fire years ago. I'd seen the ashes myself. Yet here it was, waiting in an abandoned wing of the hospital. And then the smaller figure stepped into frame. It crouched over the box, head tilting up toward the camera, as though it knew I was watching. Slowly it lifted its hand. Knuckles wrapped the metal lid. 1, 2, 3. The monitors all around me went black. Only one camera stayed alive. Camera 1, the control room itself. I froze as the feed showed me, hunched at the desk, staring wide at the screen. And behind me, so close I should have felt breath on my neck, the taller figure leaned in, its shadowed face almost touching mine. The screen flickered once, then went dark, and the knocking began again, this time on the locked control room door. 3 slow, patient, waiting to be let in. The first knock rattled the glass in the door, not loud, not violent, deliberate. 1, 2, 3. The sound carried straight through my chest, vibrating bone, memory, guilt. I pressed my back against the console, eyes locked on the door. The tiny rectangular window showed only the dim corridor outside, but shadows swam across the glass as though something leaned close, just out of sight. The monitors all around me stayed black, humming faintly like they were holding their breath. Only the reflection of my own terrified face stared back at me, pale in the glow. The radio on the desk crackled back to life without warning. not static this time. Breathing, soft, shallow, familiar. Then a whisper. "You promised, Sparrow. You swore you'd stay with me." My throat burned. "You're not him," I rasped. "You're not my brother." The voice ignored me. "Open the door." Another knock. This time harder, closer. The handle shook once, twice, though I hadn't heard keys or steps. Just pressure, like the building itself wanted me to let them in. I looked around the control room, desperate. The walls felt too tight, the air heavy with old dust and electric hum. My flashlight sat on the desk, but the beam flickered weakly when I clicked it on. The radio hissed again, louder, angrier. "You left me in the dark, Anna. You let me wander away. You never came back." Tears blurred my vision. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in years, hadn't dared revisit that attic memory. But now it was alive in the walls, in the monitors, in the very air pressing down on me. The knocking started again, 3 in a row. Then silence, then 3 again, relentless. I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking forward, whispering, "Not real, not real, not real." But when I opened my eyes, the monitors glowed back, on every single one showing the control room door, from different angles, impossible angles. And in every feed, the taller figure stood just outside, head bent against the glass. The smaller figure crouched at its feet, a tin lunchbox resting in its lap. The child lifted the box slowly, carefully, set it against the door. Then, in unison, both figures raised their hands and knocked. 3, slow, patient. The handle clicked, and this time it began to turn. The handle twisted once, twice, then stilled like whoever was out there wanted me to know they could come in whenever they chose. My lungs ached from holding my breath. The hum of the monitors thickened into a droning buzz that made my teeth ache. Then, with no warning, the door unlatched and drifted open an inch. The corridor beyond was empty, silent. But in the monitors surrounding me, the feeds showed something else. From every angle, every camera, I saw them step into the control room. The tall shadow sliding forward, its limbs too long, its head tilted unnaturally. The smaller figure following, clutching the lunchbox like a sacred thing. I whipped my head around. The room looked empty to my eyes. Only the glowing screens, the stale coffee, the hum of old equipment. But the monitors insisted otherwise. On screen, the taller figure stood just behind me, its hand poised above my shoulder as though about to touch. The smaller one crouched at my feet, opening the box. The tin lid creaked. Inside, something darker than shadows stirred. My radio screamed with static. Then his voice bled through, fractured, layered, too close. "You fell asleep, Sparrow. You promised you wouldn't. You left me alone in the storm." I dropped the radio, clutching the desk for balance. The screens flickered, and suddenly all 32 cameras showed the same thing, a close-up of my childhood attic. The slanted rafters, the quilts, the cracked window dripping rain, and in the center the blue tin lunchbox, wide open. The doll was there, the cracked porcelain cheek, the marble with its swirling storm of milk white. But between them, filling the box like smoke, something else was coiling upward. Something faceless, shapeless, something listening. My vision blurred. I stumbled back. For a moment I was 9 years old again, whispering into the dark. "Stay with me, don't leave me, please don't knock again." But the knock came. Not on the door, not on the monitors. From inside my chest. 1, 2, 3, I gasped, dropping to my knees, clutching my ribs. The control room tilted, swimming with shadows. The last thing I saw before the lights died was the smaller figure on the monitor. Its face finally visible, familiar, broken. My brother's face, lips mouthing the words, "You brought me back." When the lights came back, the monitors glowed a sickly blue. Every screen showed only me slumped on the floor of the control room, eyes wide, chest heaving. It was like watching my own death on 32 silent TVs. But I wasn't alone. The tall figure crouched behind me, one hand resting on my shoulder in the feed. In reality, my shoulder burned cold, as if fingertips pressed into the muscle. The smaller figure stood in front of me, the lunchbox open at its feet. From inside, a slow coil of black smoke poured upward, winding around my legs like vines. I shut my eyes, whispering, "This isn't real. You're not real." But the child's voice was steady, closer than breath. "You promised, Sparrow. You said you'd stay with me, and now you will." The monitors flickered again. The attic appeared, drafters sagging, rain streaking the window. Only this time, it wasn't a memory. I smelled the cedar dust. I felt the damp chill on my skin. The hospital was gone. The control room was gone. I was back there, 9 years old and guilty. The box at my knees, and beside me, my brother, his face pale, eyes glassy, the same as the night he disappeared. He turned slowly toward me. "You fell asleep," he said, voice flat. "Now I'll never let you sleep again." The attic darkened. The knocking began, louder now, endless, coming from every wall, every rafter, every part of me. I covered my ears, but it was inside, vibrating in my bones. The last thing I remember is the lid of the lunchbox slamming shut. When the day shift found the control room hours later, the door was still locked from the inside. The monitors were blank. My radio sat on the desk, silent, and I was gone. All that remained was a single photograph left on the floor. It showed the ICU stairwell, time-stamped at 3:11 a.m. I was in the frame, my face pale, mouth open in a silent scream. And standing right beside me, one hand gripping mine, was a child with eyes just like my brother's.